The clock is ticking toward the 2026 NFL Draft, and right now, the biggest thing surrounding the Pittsburgh Steelers isn't certainty, it's pressure. Pressure to get this first-round pick right, pressure to balance immediate needs with long-term vision, and pressure to read a draft board that may not fall in their favor. And if you've been paying close attention, you can already see how this could unfold in a way that defines the direction of this franchise. Let's start with what feels like the most logical plan heading into draft night, the offensive line. Internally, the expectation is clear. If one of their top targets is available at pick 21, that's the direction they want to go. The issue? There's a very real chance those players simply won't be there. Names like Francis Malani-Noah and Spencer Foe are trending toward going much earlier, possibly even inside the top 10. And then you have Venjuan, who could easily be taken in that mid-first round range before Pittsburgh even gets on the clock. So what happens if the board doesn't cooperate? That's where things get interesting and a bit uncomfortable, because one name that's quietly sitting in that conversation is Caden Proctor. He's not a lock, and there are questions about how highly the Steelers truly value him, especially since he didn't have a top 30 visit with the team. But they did meet with him formally at the Combine, which tells you there is legitimate interest. And here's why Proctor is fascinating. His transformation during the pre-draft process. He dropped significant weight, somewhere between 30 to nearly 40 pounds, and it's changed how he moves. His foot speed looks better, his agility has improved, and suddenly a player who already had solid tape now looks like someone trending upward at the perfect time. He played at a massive size at Alabama, around 380 pounds, and that clearly impacted his mobility. Now, he looks like a different athlete, but even with that upside, nothing is guaranteed. Teams like the Cleveland Browns, Detroit Lions, and Arizona Cardinals are all potential landing spots for offensive tackles before pick 21, so Pittsburgh could be sitting there watching their entire plan A disappear in real time. And if that happens, you're immediately shifting into plan B, which brings us to the wide receiver position. Now, this is where things start to feel a little unpredictable. Because the Steelers have shown serious interest in My Lemon, we're talking about both a formal combine meeting and a top 30 visit. That's not casual interest, that's real evaluation. But here's the catch. Lemon is widely expected to go well before pick 21. The chances of him falling? Slim. Possibly under 10%, maybe even closer to 5%. So if Pittsburgh truly wants him, they'd have to move up. And that likely means giving up valuable draft capital, possibly a third-round pick, to make it happen. Now ask yourself this. Does that fit what this team has been saying all off-season? Because the message from Mike McCarthy has been about versatility. He wants receivers who can line up anywhere, inside or outside, and create mismatches. Lemon, as talented as he is, projects primarily as a slot receiver. That's where he thrives. That's where most of his college production came from. Yes, he's an elite route runner with strong hands and great timing, but his role is more specialized. And that creates a ripple effect. If you bring in Lemon, you're essentially locking him into that slot role. That means players like Roman Wilson, who already struggled being used out of position, could find themselves completely squeezed out. You're not just adding talent, you're redefining the structure of your offense. And that raises a bigger question. Is it worth trading up for a player who might limit your offensive flexibility, especially when there are other receivers like Denzel Boston or Omar Cooper Jr., who could be available at 21 and offer more versatility without sacrificing assets? So now you're starting to see the dilemma unfold. The Steelers could go offensive line, but the board might not allow it. They could go wide receiver, but the perfect target might require a risky trade-up, and every decision they make here has consequences, not just for this season, but for how this roster evolves moving forward. And we haven't even touched on the quarterback situation yet, which is quietly looming in the background as another layer of uncertainty. So let me ask you this. If you're sitting in that draft room and the top offensive linemen are gone, do you stay patient and take the best receiver available at 21, or do you take the risk and trade up for the guy you really want? And this is exactly where the situation starts to tighten, because once you move past that initial decision at pick 21, everything else begins to connect, especially at quarterback. The Pittsburgh Steelers aren't just drafting for talent here, they're drafting around uncertainty, and the biggest unknown hanging over this entire process is Aaron Rodgers. Right now, there's no clear answer. There's a growing belief that whatever decision Rodgers makes won't come before the draft, and that changes everything, because if you're Pittsburgh, you're building a roster without knowing who your starting quarterback will be. That's not just uncomfortable, gamble, it's risky, and it forces the front office to start thinking outside the traditional draft approach. That's where the trade market starts to creep into the conversation. There's been real buzz around the idea of targeting a young quarterback who hasn't fully worked out with his current team, not as a desperation move, but as a calculated gamble, a reset situation, someone you bring in, let them sit, develop, and maybe unlock something that hasn't been seen yet. And 3 names have surfaced as realistic possibilities: Anthony Richardson, Will Levis, and Spencer Rattler. Each one brings a completely different profile, and each one represents a different level of risk. Let's start with Richardson because he's the most polarizing. Physically, he might be one of the most gifted quarterbacks you'll ever see. Big frame, elite mobility, arm strength that jumps off the screen. He looks built for AFC North football. The kind of player who can handle bad weather, extend plays, and create something out of nothing. But the problem is, his career so far hasn't matched that potential. He came into the league extremely raw, and instead of being developed slowly, he was thrown into action immediately. The result? Inconsistent play, injuries, and a lack of real progression. But here's the key detail: that doesn't mean the talent isn't there. It means the situation may have failed him. And if you're the Steelers, you have to ask yourself, what if you bring him into a stable system? What if he sits behind Rodgers for a year? What if Mike McCarthy gets time to actually develop him properly? Suddenly, that risky move starts to look like a high upside investment, especially if the cost is something like a 6th round pick. That's the kind of low risk, high reward swing that could completely change your future if it hits. Now compare that to Will Levis. He's not as explosive physically as Richardson, but he might be more ready to play right now. Strong arm, quick release, competitive mindset. There are tools there that translate more immediately to the NFL level. His biggest issues have been consistency, decision making, and accuracy, but context matters. He dealt with poor protection and injuries, including shoulder issues, which can absolutely affect performance. So if you're thinking short-term stability, Levis might be the safer option. If Rodgers doesn't come and you need someone who can step in and actually function within the offense this year, Levis gives you a better chance of that. But the ceiling, it's probably not as high as Richardson's. Then there's Spencer Rattler, the wild card. Connections matter here. Coaching ties, front office familiarity, and those links do exist. But compared to the other two, he feels like the least likely option in terms of priority. That doesn't mean he's off the table. It just means if the Steelers go this route, there are probably names ahead of him. Now take a step back and look at the bigger picture. If Pittsburgh doesn't find value at quarterback in the middle rounds of the draft, if names like Drew Aller or others aren't available where they want them, then making a move for one of these quarterbacks becomes much more realistic. Instead of forcing a pick, you're reallocating that asset. You're saying, we'd rather take a shot on proven NFL traits than gamble on a mid-round rookie. And honestly, that approach makes a lot of sense in today's AFC, because look at what you're up against. Elite quarterbacks everywhere. You're not competing in a conference where average play wins games. You need difference makers. You need upside. That's why the idea of trading for someone like Anthony Richardson, even with all the risk, keeps coming back into the conversation. Because if it works, you're not just solving your quarterback problem, you're changing the trajectory of your franchise. But there's one more layer to this that can't be ignored. What if the Steelers make all these moves and Rodgers still doesn't come? Now you're looking at a completely different reality. A young quarterback, whether it's someone like Will Howard or a trade acquisition, potentially competing for the starting job much sooner than expected. And that brings pressure not just on the quarterback, but on the entire roster you just built in this draft. So now it all connects. The offensive line decision, the wide receiver strategy, the quarterback gamble. None of these choices exist in isolation. They all feed into one central question, and that's the part nobody is saying out loud. But you can feel it if you read between the lines. Because every move the Pittsburgh Steelers are considering right now carries two timelines at once. There's the win now approach built around the possibility of Aaron Rodgers walking through that door, and then there's the quiet contingency plan in case he doesn't. If Rodgers commits, everything sharpens. The urgency makes sense. You protect him with the offensive line, you give him reliable weapons, and suddenly a team that looked incomplete becomes dangerous overnight. A veteran quarterback like him doesn't need a perfect roster. He needs structure, timing, and trust. That's why names like Caden Proctor or a polished receiver option become so important. You're not drafting projects at that point. You're drafting pieces that can contribute immediately. But if Rodgers delays, or worse, walks away, then every aggressive move starts to feel heavier. Because now imagine this scenario. You pass on depth to trade up. You invest assets in a specific type of receiver. You maybe even bring in a quarterback quarterback like Anthony Richardson or Will Levis, hoping to develop them behind a veteran, and suddenly that veteran isn't there. Now the timeline collapses forward. Development becomes immediate expectation, and that's when mistakes happen. That's why this draft feels different. It's not just about who they pick, it's about what direction those picks signal. Take the wide receiver situation again. If they stay at 21 and select someone like Denzel Boston or Omar Cooper Jr., that tells you they're valuing flexibility. They're building an offense that can function in multiple ways, with or without a superstar quarterback. That's a safer, more sustainable approach. But if they trade up for my lemon, that's a statement. That's a front office saying, we know exactly what we want this offense to look like, and we're willing to pay for it. It's bold, but it's also a gamble, especially when you consider how specific his role projects to be. The same logic applies at quarterback. Bringing in someone like Richardson isn't about what he is today. It's about what he could become. It's betting on traits, on development, on coaching, and more importantly, it's betting on patience. Because if you don't have the right environment around him, you risk repeating the same cycle that held him back in the first place. And then there's the internal factor. Players already in the building. Guys like Roman Wilson, who haven't had a fair opportunity to show what they really are in the right role. Drafting over them isn't just about adding talent. It's about making a decision on their future. It's about whether you still believe or whether you're ready to move on before the full picture is clear. So when you zoom out, this isn't just a draft night. This is a pivot point. It's about identity. It's about whether this team sees itself as one move away or a few steps into a bigger transition. Because you can't straddle both forever. At some point, you have to choose. You either push your chips in and chase immediate success, or you start laying the foundation for what comes next. And right now, it feels like the Steelers are standing right on that line. Tomorrow night, when that pick comes in, we're going to learn a lot more than just a name. We're going to learn how this organization views itself moving forward. We're going to learn how much they're willing to risk. And we're going to learn whether they truly believe the window is open, or if they're quietly preparing for what comes after. Because once that decision is made, there's no walking it back. And that's what makes the next phase even more important. After the first round pick, everything the Pittsburgh Steelers do becomes about reinforcing that direction. If they lean offensive line early, you'll likely see them double down on protecting the offense. If they go receiver, expect them to keep adding weapons or versatility. And if they make a move at quarterback, whether through the draft or a trade, that's when you know they're fully committing to shaping the next era. And don't overlook how aggressive this front office could still be after night one. There's a real scenario where Pittsburgh doesn't just sit back and wait for value to fall. They go out and create it, packaging mid-round picks, moving up on day 2, or even making that call for a player like Anthony Richardson if the board doesn't give them what they want. That kind of move wouldn't just be about filling a need. It would be about controlling the uncertainty that's been hanging over this roster. At the same time, the presence or absence of Aaron Rodgers is going to continue to influence every layer of this strategy. If there's still no answer after the first round, the urgency doesn't disappear. It grows, because now you're heading into the later rounds needing to find value